Ever wondered what lies beyond the interKorean border? NK News brings you an opportunity to explore North Korea from a near distance. From October 8 to 17, 2023, journey with us on the second ever North Korea from a Distance tour, visiting key border locations and observatories looking into North Korea, as well as meeting key figures working on DPRK issues. Spend 2 nights on the East Coast, see the beautiful Kumgang Mountains, scour the beaches near the interKorean border, and see Kim Il-sung's old summer house. Visit Yeonpyeongdo, the location of the November 2010 interKorean artillery bombardment. Observe North Korean hamlets from close quarters in Ganghwa and delve deep into the heart of Seoul, the capital of South Korea. Every step of the way, you'll be guided by leading NK News and Koryo Tour staff and be joined regularly for multi-day portions of the itinerary by leading experts like Andrei Lankov, Chad O'Carroll, Jongmin Kim, Jacko Zwetsid, and Gergo Vachi of Koryo Tours. As a special offer for our podcast listeners, quote podcast when making your booking for an exclusive 10% discount. Find out more at nknews.org/tour. Once again, that's nknews.org/tour and use the code podcast when booking. Let's journey into the unknown together. Listeners, and welcome to the NK News Roundtable Month in Review podcast recorded on Tuesday, September 5th. This is the 25th anniversary since 1998 when Kim Jong Un assumed the position of National Defense Commission Secretary, which was the highest position that he would take up in North Korea, more or less 4 years after his father Kim Il-sung died. So it's an auspicious date or an inauspicious date, either way, to have this roundtable. Welcome back to my colleagues Arius Dare, who is joining us from Australia, and Jongmin Kim and Ifang Bremer, who are in the NK News studio. And I'm at home, so we're doing the whole thing via Zoom. Welcome on the show, everyone.
Good day.
Thanks for having us.
G'day. You're becoming a local. Let's get into it. Arius, you were in charge of putting NK Pro's fine month in review product together this month, 38 pages in a PDF summarizing all the most important North Korea-related news and why it matters. Why did that responsibility fall to you this month? Normally, James does it.
Well, James had a very important life event called a wedding.
I was there.
To go to. Presumably the only one he'll do in his whole life. So I thought that I would carry the heavy lifting while he enjoyed his time with his new bride and some family that was visiting Korea from abroad.
Excellent. All right. So let's talk about the top section, I guess, in the NK Pro Month in Review, Foreign Affairs. I want to start with the Camp David US, Republic of Korea, Japan trilateral summit that took place on August 18th. Now, you've had more or less 3 weeks to digest and analyze this historic meeting between the United States and its 2 most important Northeast Asian allies. The meeting took just 1 day, a lot shorter than the 13 days of meetings that also took place at Camp David back in September 1978 among President Carter, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat, and Israel's Prime Minister Menachem Begin. And that 1978 series of meetings led to the Camp David Accords. This 2023 Camp David summit for just 1 day led to a much shorter statement, just a couple of pages, called The Spirit of Camp David, which is the joint statement of Japan, the Republic of Korea, and the United States. What do you think, Arius? Will we look back on this years from now and say that it was a significant event, a significant statement, or will it be just another forgotten talk fest?
Well, I actually think it's a little bit silly to compare the recent trilateral agreement at Camp David to the Camp David Accords, which is, of course, one of the seminal, multilateral agreements that the U.S. brokered, which you kind of outlined. I mean, Korea and Japan are not enemies. They are not, hostile to each other ideologically or politically. They are both U.S. allies. They are both, strong democracies, capitalist states with a lot of let's say, rivalry, perhaps, unresolved historical issues, but ultimately the administrations in Seoul and Tokyo are far more aligned than the parties were in the 1970s at Camp David. So I think that's not a really helpful comparison there. In terms of bringing Korea and Japan a little bit more aligned, I think that this probably will be remembered for decades as one of the bigger steps that every side took. Obviously, the U.S., this is nothing new from the U.S. The U.S. has been wanting its two Northeast Asian allies to be more cohesive and more aligned for decades. And it's been both Korea and Japan that have actually fought against that or kind of put up roadblocks that would prevent this. Now, one of the big things with this most recent Camp David Accord is its sticky power. Next year, we have a U.S. presidential election in the U.S. The South Korean president will change in, what is it, 3.5 years or something like that. So we'll see if this is going to continue after that. I would say if it does have a little bit more stickiness through multiple administrations on each side, then we can then say, yeah, this is actually going to be a landmark deal. Until it makes it past one or more of these administrations, I think it's too soon to tell.
Yes. Jongmin, you've got your hand up.
Right. Well, Arius just said that it's maybe silly to compare. Yeah, maybe technically, because the historical, political situation is very different from all the milestone historical agreements that were done in Camp David, especially the ones that the U.S. brokered in the past. But still, when you see the optics and the titles of the documents, I still think that partly they may have not mentioned that directly, or the situation anyway similar. They still went for similar optics, where the U.S. is helping out these two countries that are of very big strategic importance to the U.S. and in the region, in the Pacific, to have them in one classroom and saying, you're friends now, and that's it. And it came with a also the reward, which is prestige domestically, especially for South Korea, because when Yoon goes back to Seoul after the historical Camp David sort of optics, a lot of photos and videos, he has something to say to the domestic constituency. So I guess at least for the optics, they may have thought about it, I think.
Yeah, I want to come back to you in a second, Jongmin, with a question about the reaction in South Korea to that. But first to Arius, what is it that's brought this about? Is it North Korea and maybe China that's bringing Japan and South Korea closer than before?
Yeah, I mean, personally speaking, I think it very much is a China kind of factor here. North Korea obviously was in the joint statement, and obviously the allies have made significant steps to bolster deterrence and align missile detection and other kind of surveillance efforts to ensure that the populations of South Korea, U.S., and Japan are safe. But I think China is the elephant in the room, and I don't think that you're able to get the president of South Korea and the prime minister of Japan in a room signing the same agreement if they did not see a longer, more strategic threat just a little bit past North Korea on the Asian continent. So yes, I would certainly say that China is the primary factor, but is not the only push factor. I think North Korea absolutely plays a part here.
Okay, thanks. Yifeng, I saw your hand up a second ago. Did you have something to say?
Well, I know I was just curious to Jongmin. She talked a lot about how it's mainly optics and how it's a very big symbolic moment. I was just curious to hear your opinion, Jongmin, on the contents of the actual agreement. Do you think it's substantive, or do you think it's purely limited to
when I say
these
symbolics and
optics,
optics, I'm not lauding them or praising them. I'm saying that the focus was on the optics and symbolic, which means that the content itself, the agreements that were made, they were basically, like Arius says, it has a sticky power, but none of the contents were new. But maybe
it's not
some
creating
of them,
a new alliance, is it? It's just simply affirming agreements that were already in place in a way.
Yeah, I guess what we can call new is that the three leaders having a more regularized meetings, which was part of the agreement going forward, the summit level meetings, and also giving a name to and regularizing the trilateral training. That from policy folks' perspective would be big, because there were things like that so far in the past years. Like when South Korea is doing the OG Freedom Shield with the US, there always have been a trilateral on the sideline. But I guess giving a name to it and regularizing, institutionalizing the already existing platforms, I guess that would have been the most important part in the agreement. But if you ask me if anything is newly agreed, I don't think so.
Okay, final question before we move on to the next topic. Oh, sorry, go on, Arius, quickly.
No, I was just going to say, Jongmin is absolutely right. I mean, a lot of this stuff happens on a bilateral level, U.S.-ROC or U.S.-Japan. And so it's the trilateral component of this that is new. I think it's been done piecemeal before. It's been done to certain levels of of severity. But this, as exactly as Jungmin says, is supposed to routinize and sort of institutionalize that sort of trilateral cooperation, information sharing exercises, etc., that we just haven't seen with any sort of regularity.
Yeah, it'll be really, really interesting to see in the coming years, both the sticking power and also whether it develops into something more tangible rather than just the routine summits. But briefly, Jongmin, the last question before we move on is, what's been the political reaction in South Korea? Has it moved the dial on public opinion of either President Yoon or South Korea's relations with Japan?
We'll have to see the quarterly or at least like yearly surveys that some of the institutions do in order to really see what the data shows. But the approval rates right afterwards and the responses, it seemed like it did not really move that much needle, but just the existing constituents who had existing thoughts about trilateral, it's just strengthened. Like people who already thought that improving security relations with Japan and in trilateral formats, it's just basically for them reaffirming their belief through this symbolic and optics, showing like adding, like there were contents that already existed, but what was lacking was the value part. Like, why do we need this? That's persuasive enough for the general public. I think they aimed for that by creating the document names like really catchy Camp David spirit, things like that. But because there were too many documents and it wasn't clear what's new, I think maybe in terms of just PR perspective, it wasn't the most ideal to persuade the general public that this is new.
Okay, Aries, back to foreign affairs and North Korea. You also included two other stories in your monthly wrap-up. North Korea announcing its border reopening for its citizens to return, and North Korean athletes announcing they're competing abroad for the first time since the pandemic began. Both stories are kind of related, so please walk us briefly through that. What's the significance of both?
Yeah, you're right. I think it's two sides of the same coin here. After close to 4 years of Orwellian border controls, even by North Korean standards, they've decided that the risk of COVID-19 is below a certain level, that they're willing to accept people back in. People, of course, being a very select few. It seems that citizens, mostly diplomats, laborers, perhaps students that were especially selected to travel abroad in the first place, that have been stuck abroad since at least January 2020, perhaps earlier, mostly earlier in most cases, actually, are now allowed to re-enter with quarantine. And part of this also, too, is sending athletes out to participate in what are essentially prestige-building exercises. North Korea is a regular participant in the World Cup and the Olympics.
Except they missed the last one.
Yeah, in this particular case, the Taekwondo Federation World Championships. And so this has long been an important step for North Korea to do. And so it's perhaps not surprising that this is one of the very first kind of international forums that North Korea decided to participate in. What we're really not seeing yet is any sort of regular cross-border movement. And by regular, I mean traders going back and forth, smuggling, reopening. And what's something that Ifan will probably be tracking quite closely if and when it starts to uptick is the amount of defectors, because regular listeners to this podcast, as well as regular readers of NK News and NK Pro, will know that defector numbers have been historically low for years. And so once those start to uptick, and once we start to see reports of greater smuggling, or perhaps let's say a higher quantity of items crossing the border, I think that would be a pretty good indication that North Korea is approaching something close to pre-pandemic normalcy. For now, it is very, very exclusive, and it's very, it's really only the elites that were already chosen to go abroad, as well as some laborers that have a very vested interest in returning, let's say.
Okay, well, all right. Thank you, Aries. Jongwon, let's move to the story that you wrote and had published on September the 1st about US and South Korea practice precision bombing of North Korean military targets. This is a sort of a story about Ulchi Freedom Shield. Has Ulchi Freedom Shield ended?
Yes, it ended last week on Thursday, and this strike
How long did they go on for?
For almost 2 weeks.
Right.
Part 1 and Part 2.
Okay. And what were some of the specific things and scenarios that were run during these joint and combined drills?
Well, just for context, in case anyone missed the last episode, the UFS this time had more than 30 field training exercises components And the one I wrote on September 1st, it's just part of it. So there would have been more drills and scenarios and hypotheses that they were working on that we just don't know. But this one was publicized, which also means something significant. It's a message to someone else, and also domestic audiences when someone else is like North Korea.
Yeah.
And this particular drill involved a lot of air-to-air and air-to-ground strike practices, actual striking practices. And just to summarize, phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 is based on a scenario where there is an incoming low-altitude North Korea cruise missile trying to attack South Korea, and South Korean and U.S. forces conducting air-to-air drills to intercept this cruise missile. And phase 2 is basically a maybe you could say counterattack, but it's more like trying to incapacitate further North Korean attacks from North Korea's long-range artilleries, which has been a traditional threat that South Korea perceives.
Okay, so were these run as simulations? I'm guessing they didn't actually go up in the air and shoot down a missile coming from a northerly direction.
It seems like they actually did, but but they were cheeky, and they did not actually release what exactly they were striking. Set as a dummy target, supposed to be a cruise missile. They simply said that they used a target that they use for field training exercises when they are testing out direct hit or a kinetic air-to-air cruise, I think guided bombs or guided missiles. So they were using, I think they were striking something, but I think in terms of the second phase, they were definitely really trying out the live strike part of it by simulating dropping actual bombs, really, to incapacitate not just the long-range artillery, but it's more like they are trying to block the entrance of the tunnel, like North Korea sometimes actually plans, or the underground facilities.
Now, North Korea complains every time these drills happen, saying that they are offensive and aggressive. Is there a justification for that, or are they just defensive measures?
You mean justification from U.S. and South Korean part?
No, I mean justification on the North Korean side of saying that these are offensive and aggressive and are a threat to North Korea.
Well, yeah, they did not particularly use the domestic face state media to talk about this particular drill, I think. I may have to check that again, but they have been referencing in general the UFS exercises that South Korea and US has scaled up this time as offensive and at the verge of starting a nuclear war, practicing a nuclear war against North Korea, so thereby using that as a justification for North Korean leader Kim Jong Un to lead their own drills and like things like high-profile visit to the Navy headquarters recently.
Right, as you mentioned, North Korea, of course, does its own drills. Is North Korea mimicking the U.S. Republic of Korea combined model of training?
One expert actually told me that it is a possibility going forward. There were hints in state media when Kim Jong Un visited the Navy headquarters. And it seemed like North Korea is also aiming at something like phase 1 and phase 2 sort of drill, like defense and then counterattack. That was a way that U.S. and South Korea has been operating on the scenario. It's basically pushing back and then retaliating to make sure that they are not attacking back like a second strike. So it seems North Korea. So one expert, it was a South Korean expert that was saying that it looks like North Korea might be mimicking that, and by doing that, showing that if you guys do it, we can do it too.
Okay, Ifan, you had a comment?
Yeah, so Jungmin, I was curious. From as far as I know, North Korea never broadcasts or video footage of their drills, right? Do they? Because I really don't remember that I ever seen actual drills.
I've seen some footage from North Korea of training of special forces, whether the kind of stuff that ends up on YouTube and other viral video sites of North Koreans hammering a nail into a tree with their heads and, breaking concrete blocks and, going through barbed wire, that kind of stuff.
Right. You have the clips. And of course, when it comes to missiles, it's a different thing. They are obviously really keen on showing all their capabilities. But when it comes to actual footage of troops practicing procedures, I think it's very rare for them to actually reveal any of that, as opposed to the USFK, which often
not only does USFK allow journalists, but they have invited the North Koreans in the past. I'm pretty sure not this year, but yes. I mean,
really? I didn't know that.
If a North Korean delegation were to come and observe some parts of the drills, absolutely. Why would the USFK and UNC say no to that?
Because Right, and I think that would be very interesting to see because this time as well, I attended one of the drills here in South Korea, and when you're up close and you listen to soldiers communicate with each other, you really get a sense of, how well things are going, how smooth the cooperation between all the troops is. And I'd be very curious to hear, what's the quality, that
Can
of,
I,
soldier level
okay,
quality
Jacko, can I answer?
of the
Yeah,
North
please.
Koreans.
There are actually, I think, multiple questions in this. First of all, do North Koreans ever air footages of their drills? Yes, of course. But it depends on how you define drills. A lot of the things that we just report simply as North Korean state media just ran of edited footage of their missile launches. A lot of media headlines say missile launches, but if you look at their state media narratives, it's actually drills. Many of them are meant to be drill footages that they want to show their domestic audience. But I guess your part of the question about opening up to journalists, I think that's a different issue because in South Korea and the US, they open up certain drills to journalists because they're confident about them. And they also prepare a lot for the ones that open to public, right? They do not release all the drill footages or images for journalists to access. So I think on some level, it's not a complete promotion from the US and South Korean side either, but I guess just foreign journalists have access to the ones south of the border, but not in the north.
Yeah, obviously there's very limited access here as well, but I was just really curious to see, how would North Korea pull off these,
Right, there are artillery drills,
like
like if you in like 2013, 12, like just way ago, in long time ago, early days of Kim Jong Un, there were actually like drills that are meant to be based on a scenario that hits back at Yeonpyeong-do if the Yeonpyeong Island fires at North Korean island. So there are like scenario drills that North Korea does, but it's not the same as the videos that South Korea and US and the journalists reveal here. It's edited and it's propaganda.
Okay, thanks, Jongmin. We have to keep rushing. We're running out of time already. Yifeng, you've written 2 news stories recently about forced repatriations of North Korean defectors. Now, you and I on this podcast talked, I think, earlier this year about forced repatriations of North Koreans, but that was across the demilitarized zone and being sent back by South Korea. This time it's a much more familiar story, but no less tragic, and that is North Korean defectors or border crossers, temporary border crossers sometimes, being sent back to North Korea against their will by the Chinese government. It's something that's happened many times over the last few decades. And the new thing, I guess, is that we've got a number of these North Korean border crossers who have been kept in holding cells in China, waiting for the North Korean border to open so that Beijing can send them back. And you reported very recently, in fact, on September 1st, that US lawmakers have called for a meeting with the United Nations about this issue. Tell us more.
Yeah, so basically, China would regularly repatriate North Koreans that they hold in detention on a rolling basis. This is pre-COVID, but ever since North Korea closed off its borders, a lot of, well, according to the UN, up to 2,000 North Koreans have been imprisoned in Chinese detention facilities. And now that North Korea is slowly opening up, the whole human rights activist community is watching what's going to happen to these 2,000 prisoners, because obviously China will not want to hold on to them forever, right? So everyone's trying to find out, will they be sent back in batches, or will there be a mass repatriation? That's the kind of thing that I'm also looking at. And right now there's pressure from all sides on China actually to step in and prevent this from happening. So in August, South Korea's new minister of unification, Kim Jong Un, he actually directly called on China to stop this from happening. And then after that, we've seen the first UN Security Council meeting on human rights, where the UN did not call out China. So the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and the UN High Commissioner for the Rights of Refugees actually refrained from calling out China in this case. So what's been happening is that both activists and US lawmakers are now calling on the UN to also start
at that
pushing
meeting
China
at the Security Council. China and Russia, who are both, of course, permanent members, they had some things to say to react to the discussion of North Korean human rights, didn't they?
Yeah, of course. I mean, according to Russia, all the discussions when it comes to human rights and North Korea are political and should not be discussed in the University
Ifan, has
Council. And that's
the
also
UN's
China's
High Commissioner
stance.
for Human Rights, Volker Turk, responded to criticism about not calling China out?
No, as far as I know, he hasn't. So that's why it's going to be very interesting to see if the UN is going to respond to this request by US lawmakers. So this is a bipartisan group. So it's the Congressional Executive Commission on China, which includes lawmakers from both the Republican and Democratic Party. So it's going to be interesting to see if they're going to respond to
and on a related matter, the UN's Special Rapporteur on DPRK human rights, Elizabeth Salmon, is visiting South Korea this week. Has she spoken about this topic at all?
That's right. Yeah, she's spoken at length about the repatriation that is looming, and it will be very interesting to see what she will say during her visit now in Seoul. She will do a press conference on Friday, and I'll go there to see if she's going to also talk about this and particularly address this issue.
So listeners and readers of NK News should look out for Yifang's story after the press conference on Friday. Attention North Korea portfolio professionals. Are you in need of more than just sloppy and spotty South Korean news coverage on the DPRK? If so, I present to you NK Pro. Born from the established news-gathering reputation of NK News, NK Pro leverages staff experience and top-notch technology to provide subscribers with superior knowledge and tools to achieve their goals. Expect daily analysis, exclusive tools, and a suite of research tools that cover everything from North Korean state media to the whereabouts of DPRK vessels and aircraft. How cool is that? In a world where the landscape of North Korea seems unknowable to many, NK Pro cuts through the noise and provides you with the quality, reliability, and timeliness you need. Stay ahead, stay informed, and master the landscape with NK Pro. Trust me, it's a game changer. Interested? Visit nknews.org/professionals to claim your free 30-day trial of NK Pro. Once again, that's nknews.org/professionals. Okay, Arius, coming back to you, let's talk about sanctions. The US has reaffirmed its commitment to enforce punitive sanctions on North Korea. This is a tried and tested topic that we've dealt with many times. It's never much fun, and these days it seems kind of hard to take it seriously, given that Russia and China have both called explicitly for sanctions easing on North Korea at the UN Security Council. So tell us what you put together in the month in review about sanctions enforcement on North Korea.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sanctions are going to be a pretty big part of what we see over the next coming months if the reports that we're seeing are true about North Korean weapons making their way to Russian troops' arms in order to kill Ukrainians. This is something that the US has been signaling for months and months and months. It seems that a deal may be going forward after Russia's defense minister visited Pyongyang last month. The US is going to lean on what is essentially its favorite lever, which is punitive sanctions, financial sanctions, working with the Treasury Department to go after North Koreans, to go after Russians involved. So I would imagine that we would hear more of this. In terms of their efficacy, I mean, without Russian and Chinese buy-in, particularly Chinese buy-in, I think it's a little bit limited at this point. I mean, after six plus years of what are supposed to be crippling sanctions against the North Korean economy, without Chinese buy-in, I don't know what you can do besides kind of chip away at the margins here.
Yeah, what are some popular ways that North Korea busts these sanctions?
Well, I don't think that there's anything new that our listeners are going to be surprised about. It's ship-to-ship transfers. It's undeclared trade across the border. It's smuggling, like we mentioned before. And so, in fact, you may even just see more smuggling happen as the borders sort of reopen here in the next several months, making it even more of a moot point about how effective these sanctions may or may not be.
Right. Overland smuggling to countries with which North Korea shares a border is obviously a lot easier than sending things around by ship. Are there any new measures that are being tried or being contemplated by the US and South Korea to try to prevent this kind of sanctions busting?
Well, part of that is coming out of the trilateral cooperation with Japan. The UNC is obviously involved in sanctions monitoring efforts. But as we said before, and as we'll probably say on future podcasts, all roads go through China. When North Korea is 95% plus dependent for all its trade on one country, there's very little the rest of the world can do if China is not willing to enforce the sanctions that it agreed to enforce in 2017.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Arius. Jongmin, let's go back to you for some MOU blues. What the heck is going on with the Ministry of Unification? There's been a budget cut announced and some restructuring plans and some reshuffling. Give us the lowdown.
There is, first of all, a big budget cut. It's September now, which means that the regular session started at the National Assembly last Friday. And all 13 ministries and departments, they submitted the draft proposal for financial year 2024 budget. And it seems, according to a unification ministry official, the budget cut, which is a 223% reduction. This is the biggest in the past 10 years. And it comes with political context. There has been, you probably remember when President Yoon Suk-yeol a few months ago talked about how unification ministry should rethink its role and not be North Korea aid ministry. There wasn't much aid going on in the current administration, so it would have been a surprise for the unification ministry staffers to hear that anyways.
Yeah.
But anyways, the president asked for the revamping of the unification ministry in general, and after that, Yoon was concentrating a lot on focusing on North Korea human rights issues, detainee issues, and pressuring North Korea. And after that, unification minister was replaced with Kim Jong Un, who once called for a regime change in North Korea. And after that, we kept seeing these reports about a unification ministry going under investigation by either presidential office or other authorities, which were just reported. But following those weeks, a restructuring plan was announced by a ministry official in a background briefing. And it seems they are eliminating the departments that are directly related to interKorean dialogue and merging them into maybe one single unit. And there are changes like they're getting rid of the peace policy department and they're changing it to emergency response department, which one expert referred to it as a potentially militarization of interKorean policies.
Yeah, the title of your September 1st piece, how unification ministry overhaul could entrench militaristic North Korean policy. Are we seeing a struggle inside the South Korean government between military and security people on one hand and interKorean reconciliation people on the other?
Well, the interKorean and reconciliation people are staying very, very quiet, or they're quietly leaving office. A lot of people has resigned over the past few weeks, especially the ones under that worked in the ministry during the previous Moon administration.
Yeah.
Some of them are going through investigation for aiding some NGOs without approval from the ministry. Some of them are just really staying quiet, and that just happens a lot to unification ministry, not just under the Yoon administration, but when the government changes, one of the things that changes the most is their policy in North Korea, right? So, which means that their work changes and their priority changes, and that's what's happening right now, basically.
Now, I saw that the figure for the budget cut included a 42% cut in the budget for inter-Korean economic cooperation, including the operation of the Kaesong industrial complex. Now, that would seem to be a bit of a no-brainer, given that Kaesong hasn't been run by South Korea since February 2016. So that's 7.5 years ago already. Is there I'd be surprised that there's any budget for inter-Korean economic cooperation, including Kaesong, at all.
Right. I think it was related to, some part of it is related to taking care of the companies that took the hit when the Kaesong industrial complex shut down. Some of them was to manage the interKorean, the KIC building still in Kaesong, which was meant to be revived once the cooperation starts. And it's an actual building, actual staffer. So which means that there is a budget for that, which means there has been budget for that. And I think it's pretty reasonable for them to cut down some of the interKorean departments because there has been nothing going on, not just under this administration, but for the past few years.
Right.
But I guess like the worries that some of the experts had is that it's fine to cut the budgets, but the department cuts, elimination, changing the names, I think it could have a long-lasting effect on the way they see the policy, it's the potential policies.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the Ministry of Unification over its decades has gone through a number of changes. It wasn't always even a ministry, right? It was originally an office. I can't remember. Was it under the Prime Minister? It was an office, and then it became elevated to the status of ministry back in the 1990s.
Yeah.
So these things change from time to time. It remains to be seen, I guess, what comes of it. Are there any details that didn't make it to print in your stories, either because of time or space considerations?
Well, there is a part where I mentioned the NIS potential involvement,
yes.
because that wasn't fully confirmed yet or finalized yet. So I toned it down a little bit in the report. But there has been increasing the rumors about the Intel department and Intel officials, how they might be involved more and more under this administration with the unification ministry work, because there are some in Seoul who sees the unification ministry's main role not as someone who coordinates the inter-Korean dialogue or cooperation, but a department that helps out other agencies, that analyzes North Korea risks. And it seems like, as far as I confirmed, it seems NIS and the ministry is definitely discussing right now the idea of dispatching an NIS official to the Intel Analysis Bureau, which used to be Political Analysis Bureau, but they're changing the name. So it seems like it's under a bigger political context of how they see unification and the roadmap, which was another thing I couldn't include in the story. Next year, we will see a new unification roadmap that will stay for decades. And this might be related to that.
Wow. Okay. That is very interesting. Okay. Thank you, Jongmin. Yifang, back to you. This weird new group offering bounty for intelligence on North Korea. You put out a story on August 30th. Obscure new group offers $5 million bounty for critical info on North Korea. Who or what is or are March of Liberty, Yifang?
Yeah, so this week, I think it was, me and some colleagues got an email from a mysterious new organization called March of Liberty press release, in which they said they would offer up to $5 million for critical info on the DPRK to emancipate its citizens. And what struck me the most is how similar it is to a US State Department program called Rewards for Justice, which essentially also offers $5 million for disruption of DPRK illicit activities. So I was kind of wondering, is this a legit group? But on their website, they listed a crypto wallet that did seem to be a legitimate crypto wallet with about $900,000 worth of Bitcoin. And according to them, I've been emailing back and forth with this mysterious group.
So you are in touch with the March for Justice, March for Liberty.
Yeah. I emailed them to basically ask, who are you guys? Well, they didn't answer that question, but I also asked, why should people trust you guys? And then they said, well, basically, our cryptocurrency wallet containing 34 Bitcoins should be a show of our trustworthiness.
But just showing a crypto wallet and its balance, can you be sure that wallet belongs to that group?
No, as far as I know, that's that's the whole point of cryptocurrency, right? It's difficult to link that to a specific organization or individual.
Yeah, until they start transferring Bitcoin from their wallet to someone else's, it's really hard to know. Could this be a trick or a trap?
For sure. I mean, at this point, we just know so little about this group. I've talked to some experts and who told me that, people should be really careful to contact them with information, because, you don't know who's behind it. It could be a counterintelligence program by any government, including North Korea, or it could be a bunch of jokers, right? You don't know. But so far, they're not doing a great job at creating trust with the amount of secrecy that they're putting out right now.
And there's a cell phone number on the website, which is a Thai cell phone number. And I was reminded, I saw a video last week about, coincidentally, a Dutch guy who ran a dark web website, sort of like a dark web version of eBay, where people could buy and sell drugs. And he was hiding out in Thailand. So just having a Thai cell phone number there, it could be a little sketchy.
It could mean anything, honestly. Like, maybe it's just a SIM card, tourism SIM card.
Right.
We just don't know. But the point is that, it's completely unclear who this group is. And that's, one of those things when you report on North Korea, sometimes just mysterious individuals or groups just pop up and you never know if it's legitimate or not. And that's also what makes it, of course, exciting to report on.
Are there any signs that this group is related to, for example, Free Chosun or any other previously existing groups?
No, not really. I mean, people started saying when this group popped up that there would be some similarities, but I didn't really see that. When it comes to, for example, the English language on the website, it kind of seems that it's not written by a native English speaker, and also their emails definitely were not from a native speaker. Interestingly enough, they do have some Korean on the website as well, and they use North Korean spelling, for example, for the word computer. But they told me, this March of Liberty, this group told me that, they did that with the help of a defector to make it seem more welcoming to North Koreans who might be willing to give information. But then again, maybe it's a trap.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Keep an eye on that. Very interesting. Thank you, Ifan. Let me ask you this. You're listening to the NK News podcast, so you know more about North Korea than most. But how about the South? To really understand what's happening on the peninsula, you need to know about South Korea. And now you can, through our new Korea Pro news and analysis service. This is not your average news service. It's a thoroughly researched analysis of South Korea's politics, society, and economy from an international perspective. But you know what the cherry on top is? The absolute lack of commercial influences. No ads, no sponsored articles. It's just pure, objective analysis by a team of qualified specialists. And the best part? As a listener of this podcast, you get a 25% discount. All you have to do is use the coupon code PODCAST during your sign-up. So head over to koreapro.org/podcast and start your journey with Korea Pro. That's koreapro.org/podcast. Arius, North Korea belatedly made a statement about Travis King, the US soldier who ran across the demilitarized zone, I guess a month and a half back now, explaining why he chose to run across the military demarcation line into its territory. Can you tell us the facts?
Oh, the facts are a little bit hard to parse right now when all we have
just say what North Korea said.
Media.
Yeah.
So for weeks after King ran across the joint security area, we had heard nothing from North Korea. There's some unconfirmed reports from UNC that there had been some sort of communication or there was some sort of dialogue, but the Pentagon said that nothing really worked. They were trying on various channels. Then North Korea then says that they released a statement acknowledging Travis King's status and basically saying the words abuse and racism were what drove the Army private to run across the inter-Korean border. As we wrote in Month in Review, that is very possible, and it's I mean, who knows what he experienced in the U.S. military.
Right. Did they say specifically abuse and racism within the military or abuse and racism in America?
Yeah. In military. That's right. No, within the military, and he had a family member that told a local American news outlet that Travis had complained about similar treatment or mistreatment. But he chose a really bizarre country to go that. It's kind of like Edward Snowden defecting to Russia, complaining about violation of civil liberties. Years back. North Korea is a very proudly ethnocentric and xenophobic place that derides mixed race people in South Korea and beyond. I mean, there are defector accounts of forced abortions for women that are forcibly repatriated to North Korea if they're pregnant with a non-Korean baby. So I mean, you can read the Commission of Inquiry report. You can go online. I mean, I'm sure that our readers are probably familiar with some of this, but it is a really, really horrid place on race relations, and that kind of statement coming from North Korea is I think just a classic case of calling the kettle black.
Yeah. It's still there's still a lot of mystery surrounding this story. We don't know yet what North Korea's intentions are, whether it'll hold on to Mr. King or whether he'll be coming out soon. I wish him all the best. I hope he's safe up there. Thanks, Arius. Jongmin, last month when we talked about the military parade, you pointed out a new 41st Amphibious Assault Battalion. Now, at the time, North Korea's chief television broadcaster Ri Chun-hee explained the indomitable amphibious strike force, resolute in its capacity to mop up the pirates who preside over regions such as Pengyong Island in the West Sea of Korea at time of emergency, is marching forward with unwavering confidence. What have you been able to dig up about this unit since then?
Right. I've been asking just multiple ministries, multiple officials, just a lot of experts, like what to make of this. And thanks to our colleague Colin's work, I was able to ID what kind of unit this is. It seems like, according to their arm patch that Colin found, it seems like they're under the Special Operations Unit. So, and looking at their guns and the clothes that they are wearing, which Dr. Yang Wook of Asan Institute helped me ID, it looks like they sort of mimicked like what we usually see as Marine Corps, like 해병대. In Paekmyeong Island from South Korean side, there are particular Marine Corps unit, which is battalion, which is named Black Dragon. That's in charge of responding to any North Korean attacks against the island. And it seems like this one that North Korea revealed recently, I've confirmed with the Unification Ministry that this is indeed the first time that North Korea talked about or showed this battalion. And the timing is curious because looking at its flag that just for a second showed in the KCTV footage, it seems they were established in 2007, early May, just 3 days ahead, I think, of when Moon administration was inaugurated. So it was already set in stone that there will be a particular battalion aimed at an amphibious assault against this unit in the Yellow Sea. And they have been preparing for it and training for it, but they just decided not to reveal it for the entire tenure of Moon administration.
Right.
And now, it seems like just the consensus among experts were that it seems like just from North Korea's point of view, it's the right timing to show that they have been preparing for this. First of all, there has been increasing signs of North Korea potentially doing maybe joint Navy drills with China or Russia. And North Korea in general is focusing a lot on their maritime capacities against other countries like US and South Korea in the region, with the strategic assets coming in, and also preparing for potential localized 국지도발 provocation from North Korean side, so that they can use it as a leverage, and they can use this battalion to do that, just like they did in other cases near the Yellow Sea, like the Yeonpyeong shelling.
What's the strategic importance of Paekmyeong Island and other border islands like Yeonpyeong-do? And are there, in fact, South Korean pirates, as Ri Chun-hee seemed to allude to?
I think, well, Paekmyeong-do is one of those islands, including the four other islands in the Yellow Sea. Do you remember Hanbak-do, Hanbak Island? It's also near the northern limit line. During the Moon administration, North Korea kept claiming that's their island, and in South Korea there was some controversy on whether or not it is North Korean island. So West Sea Islands are of strategic importance to both of them, and if ever they go into full-scale war, it will be important to have an upper hand on the on these fortresses at the sea if it goes into an all-out war. But I guess the point here is, even if it's not an all-out war, it would make sense maybe for North Korean strategic point of view to prepare for maybe localized provocations as well.
Right, but no pirates though, right? Certainly not like pirates in the Caribbean.
Yeah, that's why North Koreans say pirates, because from their historical perspective and under constitution on either side, South Korea considers, of course, this one as their own island, but North Korea, they tend to see the south of the border as somewhere occupied due to the U.S. forces joining in, so on and so forth. So they tend to they refer to South Korean Marine Corps and Navy as pirates in the past, back in early 2010s. But it's been a while since they said that, so it's very interesting.
Okay, thank you, Jung-min. Last story for today. Yifeng, you had a story on August 31st. North Korea-Russia talks on new arms deal are actively advancing, the US says. Bring us up to speed on the latest talk about a new arms deal between North Korea and Russia. It's something we've talked about a few times this year on the podcast.
Well, I mean, the latest news is something that we're still trying to report on, which is the New York Times and BBC claiming that Kim Jong Un is to visit Putin in Russia for weapons talks. So it would be a bit weird to not mention that while talking about this. But yeah, we still don't know if those rumors are true and where they come from. So yeah, we're working on verifying that as well. But yeah, it seems that at least US officials are really convinced that more arms trade or alleged arms trade between North Korea and Russia is actively advancing, as they call it. And experts that I talked to said it's most likely to be still artillery shells, in particular 152 millimeter and 122 millimeter shells for field artillery. Russia really depends on those stocks, and North Korea has those left. But also missiles that are quite similar, North Korean missiles that are quite similar to Russian Iskander missiles. So the North Korean KN-23, for example, is a nearly identical missile. So experts have been saying that these are the things that Russia could possibly want if these rumors are true.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have seen the use of rockets in Ukraine, quite old North Korean rockets. But we haven't seen, advanced North Korean military hardware being used on the battlefield in Ukraine yet.
Right, and there was some open source analysis suggesting, saying basically that the North Korean rockets on the battlefield have ended up in Ukrainian hands. Was that because they were captured?
Yeah, so I think.
So
go ahead.
No, so just to jump in, I just want to also say I'm glad I'm not the only one in this chat room that has a hard time pronouncing the word millimeter. As an American, metric is still quite mystical to me. So you had this Financial Times report last month that basically had open source reporting citations that I believe it was rockets ended up in Ukrainian hands. And it was it essentially didn't say that they were destined for Russia, but they alluded to this. The Ukrainians cited in this Financial Times report essentially said that they had intercepted this ammunition that was from a third party country. We don't exactly know what that means. We don't know where exactly they were headed. As Yifeng says, and I would say actually for our listeners, Yifeng has, I think, what has been one of the definitive stories on this whole thing, dating back to the defense minister's visit in late July. That came out several weeks before the U.S. allegations of a particular Kim Jong Un summit with Putin, I would say, and he essentially makes the case, citing experts, that Kim Jong Un was acting as a salesman for his ammunition, for his missiles, for his technology, and especially for his production capacity. In August, he went to almost 10 different military or ammunitions factories, and you had full-page spreads on state media to essentially demonstrate how ready North Korea is to supply ammunition from all corners of the country. Given what we now know from U.S. intelligence and given the defense minister's visit and all these things taken together, it's really hard not to see this as kind of one big concerted sales pitch. North Korea stands to make a lot of money from this, which of course it goes against sanctions and it's very illegal. But I can absolutely see this happening. It would be absolutely the farthest thing from surprising.
Okay, well, that's where we're going to have to end it for today. Thank you very much, guys, for joining me on the podcast today. Arius Dare, Jongmin Kim, and Yifeng Bremer. And we wish you a wonderful month, and we'll see you all again very soon.
Thanks, Jacko.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Imagine having the most wide-ranging news, analysis, and opinion on North Korea at your fingertips. Sounds great, right? Well, it's possible with NK News. They publish a truly diverse selection of unique articles every business day and provide you with valuable newsletters and alerts. Opinion writers and journalists include regular podcast guests like Andrei Lankov, Jongmin Kim, Chad O'Carroll, Colin Zwerko, Niels Weisenzer, Peter Ward, and Shreyas Reddy. And because I know you'll love the product as much as I do, here's something special for you. Use the code PODCAST to get a $100 discount on your subscription. Redeem this podcast-only special today by visiting nknews.org/discount. That's nknews.org/discount. So what are you waiting for? Sign up for NK News today and get ahead of the headlines on North Korea. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our podcast episode for today. Our thanks go to Brian Betts and Alana Hill for facilitating this episode, and to our post-recording producer genius Gabby Magnuson, who cuts out all the extraneous noises, awkward silences, bodily functions, and fixes the audio levels. Thank you, and listen again next time.